Finding our dream home had been a journey of patience and determination. After 3 years of saving and countless open houses, we finally discovered the perfect place. A charming colonial with a sprawling backyard that seemed designed for gatherings. The moment we stepped onto the property, I envisioned string lights hanging from the mature oak trees, a white tent billowing gently in the evening breeze, and rows of chairs facing the spectacular sunset view of the mountains. "This is it," I whispered to my fiancé, squeezing his hand. "I can see us getting married right here." The real estate agent mentioned an active homeowners association, but assured us they were reasonable and mainly focused on maintaining property values. We reviewed the covenant documents thoroughly before signing. Nothing prohibited private events on personal property. In fact, the documents explicitly protected homeowner rights to reasonable enjoyment of their property. I had always been meticulous about details. My position as a clerk at the Supreme Court had trained me to examine every word, anticipate challenges, and prepare comprehensive responses. Working directly with the highest legal minds in the country had taught me the importance of understanding rules completely before proceeding. I applied the same careful approach to our wedding plans. We budgeted carefully, choosing a modest ceremony that would accommodate 60 guests without overwhelming the neighborhood. We arranged parking at a nearby church with shuttle service to minimize street congestion. We scheduled the ceremony for mid-afternoon on a Saturday to avoid disturbing anyone during quiet hours. We even distributed notices to our immediate neighbors, inviting them to contact us with any concerns. Most neighbors responded with congratulations and offers to help. Mrs. Peterson across the street even volunteered her driveway for the catering van. Mr. Reynolds, a retired florist, suggested the perfect flowers for our climate. We felt welcomed and supported in our new community. Then I met Karen Williamson. She appeared at our door one evening, clipboard in hand, HOA pin prominently displayed on her cardigan. Her smile did not reach her eyes as she introduced herself as the Homeowners Association president. "I understand you are planning some sort of event," she said, voice clipped and professional. "You need to submit a formal application for HOA approval 60 days in advance." I invited her inside and explained our plans, emphasizing the precautions we had taken to minimize any impact on the neighborhood. I showed her the notification letters we had distributed and the parking arrangements we had made. "None of that matters," Karen interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "The HOA does not permit unauthorized events, period." "I have reviewed the covenant documents thoroughly," I explained. "There is no provision requiring approval for private gatherings on personal property." Karen's expression hardened. "Perhaps you misunderstood. The board has final authority on interpreting the covenants, and I assure you unauthorized events are not allowed." She left a violation notice taped to our door the following morning. The letter cited Article VIII, Section 4, prohibiting activities causing neighborhood disruption. The fine print mentioned potential fines of $500 per day for continued violations. I searched the covenant documents for the reference section. Article VIII, Section 4 discussed landscaping requirements, not events or gatherings. This discrepancy raised immediate concerns. Either Karen had made a careless error, or she was deliberately misrepresenting the rules. That evening, my fiancé found me surrounded by legal books and printouts of state HOA regulations. His expression showed growing worry. "Should we just look for another venue?" he asked quietly. "This is supposed to be about our love, not some neighborhood power struggle." I put down the documents and took his hands in mine. "This is our home, our yard, our wedding. Everything we are planning is completely legal and reasonable. I cannot let someone abuse their position just because they can." Little did I know that this was only the beginning. Karen Williamson had made stopping our wedding her personal mission. But she had no idea that in choosing to target our special day, she had picked a fight with exactly the wrong person. The legal training that made me valuable in the highest court of the land was about to become Karen's worst nightmare. 3 days after our confrontation, official HOA letters appeared in every mailbox on our street. Karen had called an emergency board meeting to discuss a serious covenant violation threatening neighborhood harmony. The meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock that Friday evening at the community clubhouse. I arrived early, legal pad in hand, prepared to address any legitimate concerns. The small meeting room slowly filled with curious neighbors. Some nodded politely. Others avoided eye contact. Karen sat at the head table with 4 other board members, arranging papers with theatrical precision. "We are here to discuss a serious matter," Karen began once everyone was seated. She projected photographs of our yard onto the wall screen. "The residence at 427 Oakwood Lane is planning an unauthorized large-scale event without proper HOA approval." She clicked through images of delivery trucks dropping off supplies, the wedding arch components stored in our garage, and catering estimates visible through our kitchen window. I realized with shock that she had been photographing our home without permission. "The covenants clearly prohibit events causing excessive noise, traffic, or disruption," Karen continued. "This wedding would bring dozens of unknown individuals into our secure community, creating safety hazards and lowering property values." When she finished her presentation, I raised my hand to speak. Karen reluctantly acknowledged me. "I have reviewed the HOA documents thoroughly," I stated calmly. "There is no provision requiring approval for private gatherings. We have taken extensive measures to ensure minimal impact on neighbors, including off-site parking and reasonable hours. May I see the specific bylaw you are citing?" Karen shuffled her papers. "Article VIII, Section 4 gives the board discretion to prohibit disruptive activities." "That section discusses landscaping requirements," I corrected. "Could you provide copies of the specific rule you are referencing?" Her face flushed. "The complete bylaws are lengthy and not available at this meeting. The board is empowered to interpret the covenants as needed to maintain community standards." Several neighbors began whispering. One elderly gentleman raised his hand. "I have lived here 15 years and hosted my daughter's wedding in my backyard without issue," he noted. "Why is this different?" "Times change, rules evolve," Karen responded curtly. "This board has determined that large events require formal approval." The meeting descended into uncomfortable silence. Some neighbors expressed support for our wedding. Others voiced concern about setting precedents. I noticed Karen's supporters were primarily those living closest to her home. They avoided direct eye contact when speaking, suggesting intimidation rather than genuine concern. The board voted 3-2 to further investigate the situation before rendering a decision. Karen scheduled another meeting for 2 weeks later, conveniently just days before our planned wedding date. As we left the clubhouse, my neighbor Ellie touched my arm. "Be careful," she whispered. "Karen destroyed the community garden project last year when the organizer challenged her authority. She does not forgive people who stand up to her." Over the next week, Karen's campaign intensified. She began driving past our house multiple times daily, documenting any activity with her phone camera. When the florist came to discuss arrangements, Karen approached their vehicle and demanded identification, claiming she was conducting security checks. Deliveries became complicated as Karen told shipping companies our address violated HOA regulations for commercial deliveries. She distributed flyers warning neighbors about the disruption and property devaluation of unauthorized commercial events in residential areas. My fiancé received an anonymous email suggesting we could face legal action and property liens if we proceeded. The psychological warfare was affecting us both. He struggled to sleep, worrying about our special day being ruined or facing financial penalties we could not afford. "Maybe we should just move the wedding," he suggested one night, exhaustion evident in his voice. "It is not worth this constant stress." I sat beside him, fighting back tears of frustration. This is exactly what she wants. If we give in now, what happens when she decides she does not like our fence color or our holiday decorations? This is our home. We cannot live under someone's arbitrary rule. That night, I discovered through a sympathetic neighbor that Karen had created a private message group called Wedding Warriors to coordinate opposition to our plans. Screenshots showed her mocking our tacky backyard ceremony and congratulating herself on maintaining neighborhood standards. Seeing her true colors, the pettiness, the manipulation, the abuse of power, something inside me shifted. This was no longer just about our wedding. It was about justice and standing against bullying. The legal clerk in me awakened with purpose. Karen Williamson had declared war on the wrong household. Monday morning, I called in a personal day at work. Instead of heading to the Supreme Court, I set up a command center at our dining room table. Legal pads, laptop, recorder, and file folders created an organized system for what was about to become Karen's legal nightmare. First, I began documenting everything meticulously. I installed security cameras covering our property boundaries after confirming local regulations. I created detailed logs of every interaction with Karen, including times, dates, and verbatim quotes. I saved emails, photographs, and meeting minutes. I recorded phone conversations after proper legal notification. Next, I submitted a formal written request for all HOA records. The complete, current bylaws, financial statements for the past 3 years, board meeting minutes, and records of all violation notices issued under Karen's presidency. State law required HOA boards to provide these documents to homeowners within 10 business days. Karen responded 3 days later with a brief email. Records request pending board approval. Expect delays due to administrative burden. I immediately sent a follow-up citing the specific state statute requiring prompt disclosure, including the personal liability clause for board members who willfully withhold documentation. I copied all board members and the HOA's registered agent. The board treasurer contacted me privately the next day, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. I have been telling Karen we need to follow proper procedures, he admitted. Not everyone on the board supports her approach, but she has been president for 6 years, and people are afraid to challenge her. I called my former law school classmate Sophia, now specializing in property law. After reviewing the situation, she laughed. Your HOA president is operating like it is her personal fiefdom, Sophia said. She has made at least 7 procedural violations I can identify immediately. The selective enforcement alone is enough to invalidate any action against you. With Sophia's guidance, I filed a formal complaint with the state regulatory board overseeing homeowners associations. I included documentation of Karen's selective enforcement, failure to provide records, misrepresentation of bylaws, unauthorized photography of private property, and harassment. As I built my legal case, Karen escalated her campaign. Anonymous notes appeared in neighbors' mailboxes urging them to attend the next board meeting to protect our community standards. The language matched Karen's distinctive writing style perfectly. Through neighborhood connections, I gained access to the Wedding Warriors chat group. Karen had shared personal details about us, encouraged neighbors to report any suspicious activity at our home, and coordinated a petition to ban all commercial and celebratory events in residential areas. The petition specifically mentioned weddings as inappropriate residential activities. What shocked me most was discovering that Karen had successfully blocked 3 other community events using similar tactics: a retirement party, a cultural celebration, and a charity fundraiser for childhood cancer research. Each time, she had cited different interpretations of the same vague bylaws, always expanding her authority. Armed with this knowledge, I reached out to the affected homeowners. Initially reluctant to discuss their experiences, they opened up when I shared my documentation and legal research. Each had a similar story. Initial resistance followed by intensifying pressure until they eventually conceded to Karen's demands. She told me my Diwali celebration would lower property values because of the cooking odors, one neighbor recalled. I have lived here 20 years and never caused problems, but I canceled rather than fight. Another had abandoned plans for a graduation party after Karen threatened to have guests' cars towed as unauthorized vehicles. The pattern was clear and disturbing. One evening, as I organized case files, my fiancé sat across from me, concern evident in his eyes. I love you and I admire your determination, he said quietly. But I worry this is consuming you. Our wedding is supposed to be about joy, not legal warfare. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. This stopped being just about our wedding weeks ago. Karen has been bullying this entire community for years because no one had the knowledge or resources to stand up to her. Sometimes justice needs someone willing to fight for it. That night, I received an unexpected email from the HOA's registered attorney requesting a meeting. The board had forwarded my documentation, and he appeared concerned about potential liability. The tide was beginning to turn. But Karen had one final card to play, and she was about to lay it on the table. 2 weeks before our wedding date, a courier delivered an official-looking envelope. Inside was a cease and desist letter bearing the letterhead of Williams and Associates, legal counsel. The letter demanded immediate termination of all wedding plans, citing imminent community harm and threatening legal action if we proceeded. I contacted the State Bar Association and discovered no law firm by that name existed in our state. The letterhead included a bar number belonging to a retired attorney who had surrendered his license 3 years earlier. Karen had created a fraudulent legal document, a serious offense. Rather than confronting her directly, I documented the forgery and added it to my growing file. The HOA attorney was shocked when I forwarded him a copy. This was not authorized by the board or my office, he confirmed immediately. This constitutes fraud and unauthorized practice of law. The next morning, 2 county vehicles parked in front of our house. Officials in uniform approached with clipboards and identification badges. They had received anonymous complaints about unpermitted structures and zoning violations at our address. We have reports of unauthorized commercial activity and construction without permits, the lead inspector explained apologetically. We are required to investigate all complaints. I invited them inside and presented the detailed event plan I had prepared, including confirmation that no permanent structures were being installed and no commercial activity was occurring. I also showed them the temporary event permit we had obtained from the county as a precaution, despite it not being required for our small gathering. Everything appears to be in order, the inspector concluded after a thorough review. But I should warn you, whoever filed these complaints seems determined. They have submitted multiple reports under different names, all with similar language. As the inspectors left, I noticed Karen watching from her car parked down the street. When our eyes met, she quickly drove away. That evening, promotional flyers appeared in mailboxes announcing an emergency neighborhood safety meeting at Karen's house. The flyer claimed commercial wedding vendors were violating residential zoning laws and creating dangerous conditions that threatened home values and community safety. My fiancé found me staring at the flyer, my hands shaking with anger and exhaustion. "This has gone beyond ridiculous," he said, sitting beside me. "Maybe we should just have the ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. We can still have the reception here, but without the stress of wondering what she will do next." His suggestion was reasonable. The Botanical Gardens were beautiful. Our guests would understand. We could avoid this increasingly toxic situation. For a moment, I considered it seriously. Then my phone chimed with a message from Ellie across the street. She had attended Karen's safety meeting and recorded the entire session. In the audio, Karen could be clearly heard instructing neighbors to call the police if they saw wedding preparations beginning, to photograph guests' license plates, and to document any evidence of commercial activity. She even suggested reporting our catering company to health authorities for unlicensed food service. "I have been president of this HOA for 6 years, Karen's voice declared on the recording. "No one moves into my neighborhood and ignores my authority." Those words, my neighborhood, my authority, crystallized everything. This had never been about bylaws or community standards. It was about power and control. I looked at my fiancé, newfound resolve strengthening my voice. "If we back down now, Karen wins, not just against us, but against every neighbor who has ever wanted to celebrate a special moment. This is bigger than our wedding now." He nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Then we fight together." I stayed up late into the night, finalizing my strategy. I contacted local law enforcement to alert them about potential false reports regarding our property. I arranged for an off-duty officer to provide security. I sent formal letters to the HOA board documenting Karen's fraudulent cease and desist letter and providing evidence of her orchestrated harassment campaign. Finally, I prepared for the ultimate confrontation. Karen had built her power on intimidation and misinformation. My power would be based on something much stronger, the law itself. As a Supreme Court clerk, I knew that justice, while sometimes delayed, could not be permanently denied. The morning of our wedding arrived with perfect weather, clear blue skies and gentle breezes, as if nature itself approved of our stance against injustice. Our vendors arrived early, having been briefed about the situation. Security cameras monitored our property boundaries. The off-duty police officer stationed himself discreetly near the entrance, alert but unobtrusive. I watched from our bedroom window as Karen emerged from her house precisely at 8 o'clock. She stood in her driveway, phone raised, documenting the catering van as it backed into our driveway. When the florist arrived 30 minutes later, Karen approached their vehicle but retreated quickly when our security guard identified himself. By 10 o'clock, the transformation of our backyard was well underway. White chairs formed neat rows facing an elegant arch decorated with roses and greenery. A small string quartet set up in the corner. The caterers prepared a reception area under a tasteful white tent. Everything proceeded exactly as planned. Neighbors began stopping by with unexpected gifts. Mrs. Peterson brought homemade cookies for the catering staff. Mr. Reynolds arrived with additional flower arrangements to brighten the periphery. Even the elderly couple from the end of the street brought a handwritten card expressing support. "We have lived here 20 years, they told me. This neighborhood was always about community before Karen took over the HOA. It is about time someone stood up to her." At 11:30, 3 police cruisers pulled into our driveway. Karen followed close behind, clipboard in hand. My heart sank momentarily before I recognized Officer Martinez, whom I had spoken with earlier in the week. He approached with a professional nod. "Ms. Williamson has filed multiple complaints about noise violations, illegal parking, and unauthorized commercial activity," he explained calmly. "We are required to investigate." I invited the officers to inspect the premises. They confirmed that noise levels were well within ordinance limits, parking was properly arranged off-site, and all vendors had appropriate licenses. Officer Martinez documented their findings officially. "Everything appears to be in complete compliance with county regulations," he announced, loud enough for Karen to hear from her position by the property line. Karen stepped forward, face flushed with anger. "This event violates HOA regulations. I demand you shut it down immediately." Officer Martinez turned to her with measured professionalism. "HOA disputes are civil matters, ma'am. There are no violations of county ordinances occurring. If you have concerns about HOA rules, you need to pursue those through appropriate legal channels, not emergency services." Karen sputtered with indignation. "You do not understand. I am the HOA president. I decide what is allowed in this neighborhood." "Actually," I interjected, presenting copies of the actual HOA bylaws, state HOA regulations, and documentation of her pattern of harassment. "The law decides what is allowed, and nothing about our wedding violates any legitimate HOA covenant or state law." Officer Martinez reviewed the documents briefly and nodded. "Ms. Williamson, I strongly suggest you leave these people to enjoy their wedding day. Any further disruption could constitute harassment." Karen stood frozen, mouth opening and closing without words. Finally, she turned and stormed back to her house, slamming her door loud enough for everyone to hear. As guests began to arrive, I noticed many neighbors standing in their yards, spontaneously applauding as the shuttle vans delivered our friends and family. What had begun as a private celebration had become something more, a community reclaiming its spirit from petty tyranny. The ceremony itself was more beautiful than I had imagined. As we exchanged vows under the floral arch, surrounded by loved ones and supportive neighbors, I felt a profound sense of rightness. We had not merely defended our right to celebrate our love, we had restored something essential to our community. The Monday after our honeymoon, I returned to work with renewed purpose. During lunch break, I compiled all evidence collected over the previous months into an organized legal brief. The document detailed every instance of Karen's misconduct. Misrepresentation of HOA bylaws with specific dates and quotes. Selective enforcement documented with comparative case examples. Harassment incidents including dates, times, and witness statements. Fraudulent legal communications, including the forged cease and desist letter. Unauthorized surveillance of private property with photographic evidence. Attempts to interfere with vendor contracts through misrepresentation. I submitted this comprehensive file to the State HOA Regulatory Board, the County Consumer Protection Office, and the HOA's registered attorney. I also provided copies to each HOA board member individually, with a cover letter explaining potential personal liability for board members who knowingly permitted abuse of power. The response was surprisingly swift. Within 48 hours, the HOA attorney requested an urgent meeting with the board. 3 days later, a letter arrived from the regulatory board acknowledging receipt of my complaint and confirming an official investigation had been opened. News travels quickly in close communities. Neighbors who had suffered under Karen's reign began contacting me privately, sharing their own experiences. The retirement party canceled because of noise concerns. The family forced to remove a memorial garden for their deceased child because it violated landscaping uniformity. The military veteran prohibited from flying an American flag because the flagpole was an unauthorized structure. Each neighbor submitted their own complaint to the regulatory board, creating an avalanche of evidence spanning years of abusive behavior. What had begun as defense of our wedding became a community-wide reckoning. 10 days after submitting my documentation, I received notice of an emergency board meeting. Unlike previous gatherings, this one was held in the large community center with nearly every homeowner in attendance. Karen sat alone at the board table, the other members conspicuously distanced from her. The board treasurer stood to address the assembly. Based on extensive evidence and multiple homeowner complaints, this board has voted to remove Karen Williamson from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. An interim leadership committee will review all bylaws and enforcement actions from the past 3 years to ensure compliance with state law and community values. Karen attempted to object but was quickly silenced by the board's attorney. Ms. Williamson, given the pending regulatory investigation and potential legal liability, I strongly advise against making any statements at this time. The following week, a formal letter arrived from the HOA's legal counsel. It acknowledged the inappropriate actions taken regarding our wedding, offered an official apology, and confirmed that all violation notices had been rescinded. The letter also noted that the board had established a new oversight committee to ensure transparent and consistent application of community guidelines. Most satisfying was the final paragraph. The board has approved compensation for documented expenses incurred due to improper HOA actions, including security costs and legal consultation fees. Please submit receipts for prompt reimbursement. Karen became increasingly isolated in the community. Neighbors who had once feared her now openly avoided her. At community gatherings, she would appear briefly then leave when no one engaged with her. Her yard, once meticulously maintained, began showing signs of neglect. 3 months after our wedding, a for sale sign appeared in front of Karen's house. She moved out quietly on a Tuesday morning without farewells. The Wedding Warriors chat group had long since been deleted, its members either apologetic or pretending they had never participated. The new HOA board invited me to consult on revised bylaws ensuring transparency and preventing future abuses of power. What had begun as personal defense had become community healing, justice in its most meaningful form. 1 year after our wedding, we hosted an anniversary barbecue in the same backyard that had become both battleground and symbol of justice. Neighbors and friends gathered to celebrate not just our marriage, but the transformation of our community. The new HOA president, Mrs. Peterson, raised her glass in a toast to standing up for what is right, even when it would be easier to back down. The community had changed profoundly in the months following Karen's departure. The revised HOA bylaws now required transparency in all enforcement actions, created an appeals process for disputed violations, and established term limits for board members. Neighborhood gatherings had become more frequent and joyful. Gardens flourished with diverse plants previously prohibited under Karen's strict, approved vegetation lists. Most meaningful to me was how my professional perspective had evolved. My work at the Supreme Court had always focused on constitutional principles and precedent, but witnessing firsthand how legal intimidation affected ordinary people, how someone with a clipboard and invented authority could terrorize an entire neighborhood, deepened my understanding of why accessible justice matters. I began volunteering with a legal aid clinic specializing in homeowner rights. Once a month, I offered free consultations to people facing HOA disputes. Many arrived with familiar stories: selective enforcement, vague rules, retaliatory actions. I recognized Karen's tactics repeated across communities, usually targeting those least equipped to fight back. One elderly gentleman brought documentation of a $14,000 fine for planting a vegetable garden. "They say it violates the ornamental plants only rule, but my neighbor has a vegetable garden too," he explained. "The difference is he plays golf with the HOA president." Using the same systematic approach that defeated Karen, I helped him prepare his defense. 2 weeks later, he called with tears in his voice to report the fine had been rescinded. When a local community college invited me to speak about homeowner rights, I shared our story without embellishment. The audience included HOA board members, homeowners, and legal professionals. My message was simple: power requires accountability, rules require transparency, and justice requires courage. The most dangerous petty tyrants are those who disguise control as concern, I told them. They use rules not as frameworks for fairness, but as weapons against those who challenge them. The framed photograph of our wedding day holds a place of honor in our home. Behind the smiling couple stands our beautiful archway, flowers in full bloom, and a community united against bullying. It represents not just our marriage, but a principle worth defending: that homes should be havens, not battlegrounds. Karen's former house sold to a young family with children. They painted their front door a cheerful yellow, a color that would have triggered immediate violation notices under the previous regime. Their children play freely in a treehouse that would have been deemed an unauthorized structure. Their diverse garden attracts butterflies and compliments rather than citations. Sometimes justice arrives in unexpected ways. Mine came not through court decisions or legal precedents, but through the simple act of refusing to surrender what was right. Our wedding became more than a ceremony. It became a testament to standing firm when facing bullying and abuse of power. In the highest court and the most ordinary neighborhood, the principles remain the same. No one is above the law, power must be checked by accountability, and sometimes the most important cases are won in backyards rather than courtrooms.